So, if we kick off, so if we look at the impact that we've seen already from COVID, this data has come from TechSpark's data partner at Bowhurst. And as you can see, it's not a brilliant picture. So 2019 was a very successful year for investment into startups as a whole. It was one of the most lucrative years on record. Certainly here in Bristol, it was the biggest investment year ever. So that's something that played out across the country. However, in 2020, there's been a huge fall off. So you can see there, particularly looking at, so these figures on the left are looking at since we entered lockdown. So they're the comparators. It's gone down 46% of the amount invested, and the deals have gone down by 31%. So a fairly significant impact there that we're seeing from lockdown already. Bowhurst have pulled together this really useful data which talks about the impact that COVID is having on startups and what that looks like. And it's a mixed picture. For some companies, there is a positive impact for COVID. So people who, for example, do things around cybersecurity perhaps, or produce contract tracing apps, they might be having a good time. Lots of other people are having a bad time. And this set of figures is across the UK, talking about the potentially positive and negative impacts, particularly on startups and scale-ups. And that, unsurprisingly, factors through to employment. So what we're seeing is a significant impact on a number of companies. And what you can see is a spread there based on the size of the companies and which ones are likely at risk. In total, across the UK startup community, there's a potential 2.8 million jobs at risk. So there's a huge potential issue there. So let's look at the positives, because I suspect we won't be doing in our chat on the panel. There are some positives. There's some companies who are positively impacted. I don't think it will be a huge surprise for a lot of people that you're most likely to be a positively impacted company by COVID if you are based in London. That's partly because of the companies who work there, particularly ones in tech. Some of those are more positively impacted. It's interesting to see also Northern Ireland has a lot of positively impacted companies. So I'm sure Alan will get into that shortly. There are some negative impacts though, as we would expect. Northern Ireland, again, also features on the map as people who are very negatively impacted. So what you can see there is a very black and white picture of some people who are having a positive impact, some people who are having a negative, and not much in the middle. But the clear picture that you get from this, if you look at these, is the further from London, the further out of the peripheries into the country, the more negatively impacted you are. And as a set of organisations who are focused on tech clusters across the UK, this is something we're very concerned about. That's pretty much it from me in terms of the presentation. But I thought it would be helpful to very quickly just set the scene. So what we're going to do now is my lovely panelists here are going to introduce themselves, and then I have some questions. But also please do add your questions into the session chat at the side, and we will endeavour to answer those as well. So I'm going to go around clockwise from who I can see. So Joel, do you want to kick us off and do an introduction of who you are and what you do?
Sure, yeah. So I'm standing in for my colleague, Dom Halla. So it's the tribute act really to the original. I'm head of policy at Codec. We're the organisation, the policy voice for startups, both and in Brussels. Basically, we complement the work that you guys do at the UK Tech Cluster Group. We take a more macro point of view when it comes to access to finance work. So some of the stuff that we've been working on, like over the last year, is like tax incentives for investing into startups, but then also like incentives such as like the R&D tax credit. So last summer we did a paper on expanding the R&D tax credit into to allow costs for data set purchases and cloud computing costs to be included in it, and that was then announced at the budget last year. But then more recently, we were very, very focused on the establishment of the Future Fund. We saw that CBILS wasn't working because of state aid restrictions the banks were applying to, and so we saw the need for an equity finance solution, which we've seen with the Future Fund, which has been pretty successful so far. So the figures revealed after the first 21 days was that £50 million worth of cash had got out the door. And then on its first day of operation, the sheer demand just vindicates how important it is to the sector, with £450 million worth of applications made in the first day. And obviously the government had only capitalised it for up to 250 million. So we're hopeful that we'll hear an announcement that it will be extended.
Fantastic. Thanks, Joel. Alan, would you like to give us a potted history?
Okay, I'm Alan Watts. I work for Catalyst, which is a not-for-profit in Northern Ireland, completely independent of government. We don't take government funding. We have property operations which provide a surplus to do the good stuff that we do. And also we have a volunteer army of about 1,000 business execs, entrepreneurs, exit entrepreneurs who get what we're doing and give of their time pro bono. So we spend a lot of our time building up and battle hardening the deal flow for Northern Ireland. It was interesting, the figures that you produced at the beginning there, and the Beauhurst figures are generally fairly good. We use them as a basis ourselves. However, they're not 100%, and they will admit that themselves. Because of the nature of Northern Ireland and our position as a trusted third party in the ecosystem, we actually produce the definitive figures for Northern Ireland. And we do it by starting with the desk research, adding some local intelligence, and then going around and having a lot of coffees with the local law firms who, because they trust us, basically mark our homework. So we really do get all the deals, all the unannounced deals, everything. And it's interesting when you look at it, we're actually publishing the 2019 figures next week. But I can tell you that in the last couple of years, there's been a circa 30 million invested in the sort of tech industry, new share capital in Northern Ireland. The figures we're going to announce will be north of 40 million. So 2019, possibly slightly ironically viewed from where we are now, was absolutely a record-breaking year for us. Angel investment doubled in all of that. And also I think it's going to be relevant to what we're about to discuss to say that 42% of that money came from outside Northern Ireland. And that's something we work very hard at. And it's not an accident. So that's the sort of scene as we see it. And I'll stop at that point.
Brilliant. And I think, Abby, you will probably, you're muted, by the way, Abby, before I introduce you.
Can you hear me now?
Hang on. Maybe I muted you, sorry. So Abby, I think probably sees something fairly similar in her role as investment activator. So would you like to introduce yourself, Abby?
Sure. So I'm Abby Freer. I'm a director at TechSpark as well, but I also am one of two people who run our investment activator program, which is a 2-year pilot program within the Southwest, which is we've brought together sort of 8 private sector partners and some money from the Combined Authority to create a program to stimulate investment via Silicon Gorge. So we run a couple of pitching competitions throughout the year to help we get companies apply, and they run through a 3-stage process to get in front of a room full of investors. We also do more informal pitching events for companies who perhaps don't have access to incubators to practice their pitches. And we run quarterly investment briefings for the investors and for neighbours of investors in investment in the region to come together, to share, to learn, to network, and hopefully sort of stimulate capital into the region. We also do a lot of content through TechSpark, and basically it's trying to highlight the companies that are looking within this region to help attract investment into the region as well. So it's a 2-year program, and it's about to we're about 6 months in so far. So
brilliant, thanks, Abby. So I've just seen Erica has pointed out there are some questions specifically around gender and ethnicity. And I know that, yeah, you're completely right. The figures from British Business Bank are talking about less than 2% of money invested are going into businesses that are run or founded by women. So we do have a couple of questions specifically about that. So we're mixing a conversation around what's happening in the regions and the challenges for the regions, but also the challenges to make sure that founders are treated in a way that makes sure that the best ones can access money, regardless of any of their characteristics, other than hopefully they're all ethical. Like the unethical ones can sort off and not want about them getting any money. So let me just very quickly dive into a big issue then. What do people think the biggest issue is in the investment landscape outside of London? Why is there a difference between the amounts raised in London and the amounts raised in the rest of the UK?
I personally think it's access to the VCs and the fact that, you know, equity investment is still a lot based on personal connections. And so a lot of the VCs are based in London and don't necessarily know what's going on in the regions. And so it's hard to make those personal connections if they don't already have the contact there.
I'd like to back up what Abby says and also to say what we do about it. The good news is the thing that keeps VCs awake at night is the fear of missing out on a good deal. So it's much easier for them to work through the connections, as Abby says, and everything else, and work within the London bubble. We're about as far away from London as you can get. So I spend a lot of my time, in fact, my colleagues describe my job title as Director of Funding as hanging around in dodgy wine bars and coffee shops in London. And I'm pleased to say that's actually true. We put a lot of effort in building up the relationships. And in effect, we get to know what the fund managers, the VCs and everybody else are looking for individually. And we feed them very few, and that's the clue to it, very few deals, but that match the area they're interested in. So from their point of view, they know they're not missing out because we're doing the radar for them. And so there's very much something in it for them. We also run various events. We get over to Belfast. Last year, we taught them how to properly pour a pint of Guinness in a Belfast pub. Important things like that. And they are important in terms of building up a connection and a relationship. So that's how we get around it. And the fact that 42% of our investment comes from outside Northern Ireland tells you it works, but you have to work at it and make it easy for them.
And thinking about in terms of some of that access, do you think some of that is around the credibility? So is there a thing about investors traditionally have thought that businesses in London are more serious, are more credible than a business that's running out of Swindon or Sunderland or Bristol or Liverpool or wherever else in the UK?
Potentially historically, but I feel like that's changing at the moment because, you know, half the reason that people go to the regions is for perhaps, you know, cheaper talent, and it doesn't mean that talent's any worse than anywhere else. So I feel like that's changing, and obviously at the moment, especially as there's much more virtual events happening, and I feel like that's changing. But yeah, I think historically there probably was an element of that, and maybe it's still, you know, maybe it's still ongoing.
Well, the key thing is going to be the quality of the deals. And again, I agree with Abby. There was a perception that if you were serious, you were in London. Yeah. But at the end of the day, if your region is producing good quality deals, and I'm biased, but our region is doing that, and the figures that we have show that the investment is increasing, and it's increasing from outside of town. Well, fundamentally, it's because of all the work that a lot of people are doing. In our case, volunteers are doing to battle harden the companies. If the quality is there and you make it easy for them, they will invest.
Joel, what's your view? You're based in London, aren't you? So maybe you have a different view.
No. I fully agree. I agree both with Alan and Abby. It's an access. It's to VCs. I know from both anecdotal evidence and statistics from the UK BAA that there are a great network of business angels out there. It's then when you get to the firms that become to the size of 1 to 3 million, there's a massive drop in funding for seed stage businesses, and that's partly to do with the maturity that we have in the ecosystem, and that the funding's just basically going up the funding chain. But like, especially in the regions, it's just there's a massive gap for companies between those 1 to 3 years.
Yeah. And I guess just touching on a couple of the points that audience members have asked around, particularly around businesses that are founded and led by women, and in fact even mixed teams who struggle particularly to raise equity funding, and people of colour are less likely to be able to raise equity funding. And the data absolutely shows that out across the country. I don't think there's anywhere where it's particularly better than anywhere else in the UK. Have you seen programs, have you seen activities that do make a substantive difference to this? Because what we ideally want is people to be able to go away with ideas of how they can make a difference in those spaces.
Well, I can tell you the figures for Northern Ireland, which are not that great. 13% of our investment, and that figure hasn't changed very much, is going into companies with at least one female founder. In a relatively small area, because we're only 1.9 million people, and I mean, I'm talking about in an average year, somewhere in the mid 60s of deals, it's actually quite difficult to do something positive. I have to say that we have some really excellent female founder types companies, and a couple of our success stories we'll be trumpeting about in a couple of years' time will quite obviously be ones like that. So I think that there's going to be a role model thing, but we're such a small area, it's slightly difficult for us to do anything larger.
And the problem is that, you know, there's not that many female VCs or VCs of colour at the moment. So, you know, people, and if there's companies that women are creating are women's products, which I know is not obviously everything, but people like to invest in what they know, they have experience of. So that, you know, until there needs to be more women VCs, or they need to be highlighted more. And I think there are things like, you know, the debut sessions, which is, I think 8 VCs have come together to help early stage founders have virtual sessions. And there's a really diverse group of investors on that panel, which is fantastic. So I think, you know, and obviously that's not regional based, so people can just go apply to sort of pitch at these sessions. So I think things like that will make a difference.
Yeah, and just building on that, like also like over the years we've seen dedicated funds set up for this. Obviously, it's a drop in the ocean of the whole entire problem. But I think one of the good things that the government could do is obviously they tied the Future Fund access to VCs have to sign up to the Investing in Women Code. But if they were to replicate that for other underrepresented groups, and that all public money had all funds that are applying for public money had to sign up for those codes, I think that would be a start.
And I guess it's less so investment, but partly in terms of challenges of being an underrepresented founder in the first place. There are a number of programs across the UK, and I think there is absolutely a case to be had for positive discrimination in some of those programs to make sure we change what the founder makeup looks like. I know certainly in Bristol, that's a piece that has been something that's been growing in importance in the last 3 or 4 years. There's some national programs, but it's something where it's relatively easy to do at a local level as well. So I've certainly seen via Set Squared and some of our colleagues a whole set of programs to support more underrepresented founders in the first place. So something that hopefully, Alan, you'll have a couple of opinions on is regional investment funds. So I know you do have some regional investment funds in Northern Ireland. Do you think that's the way? Is that how we can drive growth and investment right across the country, by having a set of regional investment funds that fund in different areas, or is that just a patch?
Well, you know me well, Ben, whenever you say you're sure I'll have an opinion, I do. We do have regional funds in Northern Ireland, and let me first of all remind you that the FT published an article last year which showed that Northern Ireland was the best place, the best region in Britain to start a company and grow it to a turnover of £1 million. I will not quote where we were in the league for growing it after £1 million, quietly brush that under the carpet. But at the early stage, we are very, very good. And one of the reasons is that we have government inspired and government funded. We have a seed fund and we have a co-investment fund. And we all know that seed funds, if they're done commercially, will not make money. So the fact, I think that the model is excellent, and the figures that we have in Northern Ireland show how well it works, and the organisation contracted to do that by government are very, very good. They're also active in Scotland. So that works well. However, if I was going to make a change, and I don't think government are keen on this, I would say having 2 seed funds, so even an element of competition, would be excellent. So if there was something I would do for other regions, it would be to set up or cause government to fund regional seed funds and proof of concept type stuff at an early stage, but do it reasonably commercially insofar as you can. However, this idea of setting up regional VC funds, I think, is out of date. Fundamentally, a VC's job is to select the best, in their opinion, companies and invest in them. And if you limit their view to a particular region, they cannot, by definition, select the best. And therefore, they will continue on an ongoing basis to need government aid, and it becomes a self-perpetuating situation. So, in my opinion, at the seed funds stage, yes, government regional funds, absolutely necessary, and our figures prove it. At the VC level, no. I think it is the wrong way to go, and it perpetuates leaning on the public crutch as such. So you wanted an opinion, you've got them.
And Bill, I know you were very involved in the Future Fund. Have you seen a regional breakdown of that data? I know they haven't published the regional breakdown of that data.
Yeah, so we've been pushing for that. Because we want transparency over like how diverse the funding is, and towards founders as well. Like we really want that data, and they haven't published it yet, but they said that they will be publishing it. I think they gave us the date of like the 10th of July or something like that. One of the things I do like that's come out of this crisis is this Liverpool City Region Fund. That's another seed fund, and I think it's a really good idea, and it's an interesting idea of tying local socio-economic issues with tech startups that can help the local government solve those issues, and I'd quite like to see that more broadly. I think it's something that could be replicated across the country.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've only got a couple of minutes left. So I have a couple of questions, which I'm gonna tie into one question. What we really want to come out of today is tips and things that certainly public policymakers can come up with that will help create a fairer future in terms of investments, and that may be equity investment, that may be debt investment. I'm sort of unbiased as far as where the money comes from, as long as it helps. So in terms of economic development, what have you seen that is a successful program? What works? That is something that we might be able to replicate in different parts of the country and help people. And if there was a single ask, if you had a magic lamp, what would be the things that you would ask government, either nationally or locally, that you think would make the biggest difference?
Well, I've already nailed my colours to the mast in terms of I think that they should do regional seed funds. And I would also amplify that by saying I think the Northern Ireland model is particularly good because the same organisation administers proof of concept grants of 10 and 35k competitively, but 100% grants. And what they say is that then they end up, after a period of time, investing equity in about 10% of those. So the proof of concepts allow them to see all of the deals, or pretty well all of the deals, and get to know them over a period of time as they develop, and then they come in with the equity investment. But as I've said, two would be better than one, and a bit of healthy competition. So I think that model replicated is what I would like to see.
Cool.
I kind of second that as well. I think a regional seed fund would be fantastic, and also just the extra money. So the stuff that we're doing at the Investment Activator Programme, you know, to be able to do what Alan said he was doing in terms of the personal introductions and going to get to know all the investors. We at the moment don't have the time to really do that. So have extra time and money to be able to go and really get to know the investors and do the personal introductions. That sort of thing would be great as well. So
cool. What's the
I fully agree. So regional seed funds, and the money's there. If you just repurpose them from Innovate UK, we can set them up. That's something that we're actually pushing for when it comes to recovery policies. So I'm in full agreement.
However, Ben, there's one thing I would add, which is not to do directly with funding, but in terms of immediate impact, what could government do? 3 words: procurement, procurement, and procurement. There's lots of tech out there. We all know the difficulties of government procurement, the conservative approach driven by the need to look after public money, all of that type of stuff. And if they can drop all of that red tape now, and it's a great opportunity to digitally transform in all sorts of areas in the regions, that would make such a difference to our tech startups.
Absolutely. Well, we have less than a minute. I brought you in on time, which I'm amazed by. So thank you very much. I've just seen our colleague Paul Jones, who's from the British Business Bank, has just given us some stats on the Future Fund. So they've released them today. 236 million has been released to 252 companies, of which 45% are outside of London, 79% have mixed gender teams, and 56% have BAME or mixed ethnicity teams, which I think they're all figures that are much higher than I would have expected. So pretty impressive there. I will have to tone down my cynicism for once. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us on this session. We are immediately going into the next set of sessions now.